This is an estimate, since always weather, sunlight, and location determine when a plant will bloom. I'm attempting to show you what our bee girls are looking for and bringing into the hive. This is not a program on what you should plant. I'll try to warn you about things that you probably don't want to have around, but these are things that the bees actually are going out and finding what they're actually foraging on. Some plants I showed you, you would definitely not want in your garden. Before we get going, I need to give you a little commercial for the Beekeepers of Indiana Young Beekeeper Award. This is a program designed to recognize and award young people who are involved in beekeeping. The process involves the applicants writing a few paragraphs about topics pertaining to themselves and their experiences in beekeeping. That constitutes the application, which is sent to me. I then send all of the applications, all identifying information redacted, along with some score sheets, to 3 judges, none of whom are members of a bee club that any of the applicants belong to. They judge, send me back the score sheets. The top 3 in each category, junior, which is from ages 12 to 16, and senior, ages 17 to 22, are invited to oral interviews with another 3 judges, again, not members of our applicants' bee club, at the fall conference. The awards are substantial. In the junior category, the top 3 get a complete hive setup and cash awards of $50, $100, and $250 for third, second, and first. The seniors receive cash awards of $300, $500, and $1,000. Now, last year we had only 2 senior applicants, which left $300 on the table for anybody. So if you know any young persons who would be eligible, encourage them to apply. Information is on the Beekeepers of Indiana website, which is indianabeekeeper.com, under the program tab. The deadline is September 1st, but start thinking about it now. Okay, that's the end of commercial. Then we'll get on to the flowers. The first thing, as I said, we're divided into months. So we're going to start with February, and there are a few things that may start blooming the end of February. The first thing, the very first thing that blooms, and the bees absolutely go for it, is silver maple. This is considered a junk tree since it has very soft wood and it breaks easily. Its shape is usually very open. It's not suitable for most yards, but all of the maples are valuable to bees. Like all maples, it has both male and female flowers. In this slide, you can see on the left are the male flowers, and see the anthers with the pollen on them sticking out. On the right are the female flowers, which typically are down kind of under and stay very close to the stem. The flowers are pretty insignificant in themselves, but they do have a lot of them. And if you look at a tree that is in bloom, you'll see kind of a pinkish cast to it, where all of these flowers on the stems show. The pollen on the silver maple is much better than the nectar. But remember that at this time of the year, the bees are frantic for pollen to feed the larva that's starting to come on rapidly. And we're feeding them sugar water for the nectar. So they're really out there looking for the pollen. Okay, the next thing is a contorted filbert. Now, I consider this a very underused shrub or small tree, depending on how you prune it. It can have multiple stems, which makes it a shrub, or just a single stem, which makes it a small tree. First and most striking are these wonderful contorted branches. Imagine them in the dead of winter. They add beauty to your dormant garden. They're also great to snip off and put in flower arrangements. They're really pretty. Next, the catkins are just loaded with that precious pollen. Note the red female flowers. They're very tiny, and you see one above those catkins that are the pair of them that are second from the right. If you look up that stem, you'll see a red flower up there. That's the female. Now, they will give you a bonus. This shrub produces hazelnuts, also known as filberts. If you can keep the squirrels away, you can enjoy the fruit of our bee girls' pollination efforts. Next thing is another underused shrub or a small tree. Blooms very early. You can kind of see the snow behind this one. And produces moderate amounts of nectar and yellow pollen. It's valuable to the bees because not much else is blooming at this time of the year. So if it's going to produce any pollen or nectar, they're going to be there. And this is the witch hazel tree. You can see it's just a small tree. It also can be grown as a shrub with multiple trunks. Winter aconite. This is one of those very small spring bulbs. As you can see, cold weather and snow don't keep it from blooming. We only hope that the weather every now and then gets warm enough around to get to it. And when it does, they love it. Hellebores are one of my favorite perennials, and my bees agree. I often see them climbing around these flowers. My hellebores are about 20 years old and were grown from seed brought from England. They're much newer, more brightly colored hellebores, but I can't vouch for the pollen and nectar quality of them. Often breeders like to develop bigger and better for the human consumer, and they kind of forget about the insect consumers. This is what mine look like in January. If you look very closely, you'll see some kind of dark 5-leaved clusters. They're evergreen with a leathery leaf that discourages deer. Keep in mind, however, that a hungry deer will eat just about anything. Then after January, in a very few days, I look again, and there they are. See the plant and the buds down in there. And they bloom very early. Sometimes they've been covered with snow, and as soon as the snow melts, I look at the buds are there. Okay, March, as we know, comes in like a lion and goes out, well, maybe not like a lamb in Indiana, but usually things are waking up. Red maples are the next maples to bloom. Plants are starting to produce more nectar now, but still produce lots of pollen for those bee babies. This tree is lovely in the landscape if you have room for it in your yard. It's called a red maple, not for the color of the blossoms, because virtually all of the maples have red blossoms, but for the beautiful red color in the. And there it is in the landscape. It is a big tree typically. Now, on to some of the small bulb spring flowers that are so valuable to the bees and brighten our spirits after a long Indiana winter. This one is called Glory of the Snow, and its name says it all. Snow doesn't bother it. Another cold weather beauty that the bees love if it's warm enough for them to fly. And usually we find a few days where the bees can fly. Like today, maybe if they can go through the wind, they were probably out. I didn't go out and look, but I know a couple of weeks ago they were out one day. Crocus, familiar to all of us, I think. And if you sit out and watch your bees come in with their loads of pollen, as some people love to do, and it's really kind of fun to do, you can usually tell when they've been hitting the crocuses because of the brilliant orange of the pollen. Crocus, however, are deer candy. So you might have to plant them annually. I don't have much luck with keeping them going here. The deer will come right up to the house. Next one is called a snowflake. And because of the shape of it, as well as the fact that it blooms in the snow too, again, if it's warm enough, the bees will be right there. They climb right up into those cups. Our springtime favorite, pussy willows. Those catkins look so fuzzy because of all the pollen on them, just waiting to be a bee larva's breakfast. Willows are tough, fast-growing, and have extensive root systems that love water. Think sewer pipes and septic systems. Be very careful where you plant these. They're great in the yard, but you've got to keep them away from your sewer lines or septic system. I hesitate to put them in here because they're invasive, excuse me, but where they grow, the bees love them. They're very pretty in the yard. They grow in big swaths across the yard. Bees love them and they get spread everywhere. The defining feature on them, however, is their bright blue pollen. Just look at the saddlebags on a couple of these girls. The one in the middle and the one in the upper right have these bright blue pollen bags. This is called henbit. I find this winter annual in protected places blooming like mad very early, sometimes before March. It's a winter annual because it really starts in the late fall, kind of sits there through the winter, and as soon as the light gets to a certain point, it really starts growing and blooming almost immediately. It also has bright red pollen, adding another color to the pollen mix. And I sometimes wonder if the larvae have color preferences in pollen. And well, but for most of their larval life, their eyes are not developed, so I guess we'll never know. They have to depend on the worker bees to decide pollen variety. And the bees do. We're not exactly sure how they choose, but they find that some pollen has better quality for whatever they want. They have done studies and show that they will go to certain plants before others. Wouldn't you think that flowers as lovely as those of forsythia should be loaded with pollen and nectar? No, not a bit. They have absolutely no pollen and no nectar. I don't think we can blame the breeders for this one, though, since it's been the case for hundreds of years, as far as I can find out. It isn't that they have developed them, the newer varieties, without pollen or nectar. The old varieties are the same way. Daffodils, jonquils, narcissus, they're all names for pretty much the same plant, whose defining attribute is that absolutely nothing eats them. Not voles, chipmunks, squirrels, goats, cattle, or even deer. I gave some to my daughter-in-law in North Carolina, and she planted them in the woods where herds of deer frequented. She said they were the only thing the deer would not touch. Now, I don't guarantee it. As I've said before, a hungry deer will eat just about anything, but this is going to be at the very bottom of their choices. Now, I have seen squirrels dig them up, take them a little ways away, and drop them with just a tiny bite out of them. Didn't hurt the bulb at all. When I replanted it, it grew like mad. My theory is that bees, like other animals, simply don't like the taste of daffodils. The pollen probably tastes as bad as the rest of the plant. So everybody's always asking, what can we do to help the bees? The answer is plant more flowers. Natives are the best, but almost any flowers are welcome to a busy bee. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
What's next? Give me a sec. Gotta get out of full screen here.
But I can look at the forsythia and the beautiful daffodils the same way every year. Absolutely. The harbinger of spring, it's beautiful.
Okay, and which is your slide? Are you spring feeding?
I'm Jim Burns, but I'm talking about spring feeding.
You can call it spring feeding.
So do we have vendors here tonight? We don't have any, never mind. Okay, I'm gonna talk about spring feeding, but before I do, two things. First of all, David, where are we at? What's the number?
0 so far.
0 so far.
But we don't have one.
Yeah, okay. So you all know what we're talking about?
Growth days.
Growth days, that's right. Where are we at? 0 so far, so
We don't have one in the next few days.
we're getting there, we're getting closer. When to super, when to start getting your hives ready for the season. It's this warm weather, we get a couple of 60-degree days like this, it's gonna be honest, like nobody's business. Second thing, I would like to, we don't do this often enough, I would like to very formally acknowledge Paul in the back, who is here every month in the back, making all of this work. Not struggling, you know, but setting up the YouTube channel and taking care of our announcements and our Facebook and our email. And he does a ton of the behind the scenes stuff that frankly the rest of us are not competent to do. And we sincerely appreciate him and all of his efforts. So please. Yeah. I agree. Everybody's in on that. All right, well, spring is upon us, or almost upon us. So we thought it would be apropos to talk a little bit about spring feeding. How many here have more than one season of beekeeping? More than one. Okay.
More than one.
More than one season. In other words, you've been through 1 year cycle already. Most of the crowd. Few here that are new, brand new beekeepers, or new-ish. Okay. So a lot of you may already have feeding patterns set up. And so I try not to do this in like real excruciating depth. But what I was hoping to do with this tonight was to talk about some ways of feeding that you may not have thought of, or that you may have seen and wondered, how does that work? So I want to, there we go. I'm just going to do just a little bit of background. So in this part of the country, a hive needs anywhere between 60 and 80 pounds of honey to likely survive the winter. This number varies hugely depending on who you talk to. I've seen numbers as low as 40 to 60. I've seen numbers as high as 70 to 100. The truth is that your hives need whatever they end up needing, and the best thing to do is to kind of pay attention to that. Just as a side note, how do you know if your hive has 70 pounds of stores? How do you know that?
Lift the back.
Oh, and you can tell 70 pounds.
I can feel if it's light or not.
David, how do you know? You lift it up. Yeah. What does a medium super full of honey weigh?
40.
Huh?
40.
40 pounds. So if you have a medium super on your hive as it goes into winter, and that's medium super full of honey, you know you've got about 40 pounds right there. Deep super full of honey,
A lot.
about 90 pounds, 80 to 90 pounds.